Gracie Abrams is an up-and-coming Gen Z pop star and also the nepotism daughter of director J.J. Abrams. And she was recently featured on the cover of Cosmopolitan's Valentine's Day issue. And of course, knowing Cosmo, they made the entire thing about her sex life. So she decided to open up about that. She was asked if she had any sex advice to share and said, "I've only more recently become proud of my sex life."
How old is this person?
She's 25 years old.
Oh, okay, right.
"The best I've ever felt during sex is when I have been performing the least in the moment. I think that comes from being in relationships with people who see me for who I am and who respect, love, and cherish me. People who actually want to learn about me and my body. But this is newer for me too." She then went on to make a condemnation of pornography and the influence that it's had on her generation, and it's teaching them the wrong ideas about sex. But there is a huge catch at the end of this quote. She says, "Porn is BS. It's dangerous, not real, and a performance. It's really dangerous for young people for that to be their introduction to sex. I had a lot of questions. I took to the internet for answers, which is frightening to think about now. Young people need to learn about sex from a reputable source, like Cosmo, or a strong mentor, not just scrolling aimlessly online like I did."
Both of those things are like learning sex from porn is probably pretty bad, but learning it from Cosmo is equally bad.
Yeah. Cosmo, of course, is known for their covers, which are like 13 tips for how to give him the most like mind-blowing BJ of his entire life.
Unless it's
build a sandcastle around his dick and then kick it down. Like I don't know.
Unless it's Evie, in which it's all the same things, but it's for
with
your husband.
Yes. Yeah, right. So all of these magazines are known for making that the focal point of what they write about for women. And she thinks that is the reputable source that teenagers should go to learn about sex.
You know what this has kind of done? I think about the way that sex was depicted in movies, or at least introductions to sex was depicted in movies growing up, which is like the teenagers that fumble around the idea and it's new and they don't understand it and they don't really get it and they don't know how to do anything in that world. And that's part of growing up. You know, people that don't, you know, because it's not like Hollywood was portraying it as something you waited to do till marriage. It was something they did when they were 16. And that was always the age in the movie, 16. Sure. And the idea was they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't get it, but they had to kind of figure it out. And that was part of life. You don't really see those types of stories anymore.
Yeah, that's something I remember from Juno. Yeah. And it also, of course, showed the consequences when they were not supervised or taught about these things beforehand. But she at least said, you know, you could look to a strong mentor. Okay, how about your parents who are primarily responsible for educating you about the world and relationships? But there's no mention of that. She's praising Cosmo while she is being interviewed by Cosmo. And she's saying they are the source for sex education for minors, which is absolutely insane. And this reminded me of Billie Eilish's comments about the influence that porn had on her as a child. She said that it actually really traumatized her and gave her the wrong ideas about sex and gave her perverse sexual interests. So I want to pull up that clip before we move on.
As a woman, I think porn is a disgrace. And I used to watch a lot of porn, to be honest. I started watching porn when I was like 11. I thought that's how you learned how to have sex. I was watching abusive porn, to be honest, you know, when I was like 14. And I, you know, thought I was one of the guys and would talk about it and think it was really cool for not having a problem with it and not seeing why it was bad. And I think it really destroyed my brain. And I feel incredibly devastated that I was exposed to so much porn. I think that I had like sleep paralysis and these like almost like night terror / just nightmares because of it. I think that's how they started, because I would just watch abusive BDSM. I couldn't watch anything else, like unless it was violent. I'm so angry that porn is so loved.
Didn't she come out later and say that she loves it though? Like after this?
I don't remember that. I do remember her saying that she watches herself in the mirror.
I remember that.
Yeah, she has a lot of weird, conflicting messages about sex and sexuality, as does the rest of Gen Z. But I find it ironic that Gracie Abrams condemns pornography because it's a performance and it's not real, implying that things like Cosmo are somehow more real and authentic. And it's funny that she says this because I recently read about the history of Cosmopolitan magazine and the fact that it was inspired as the women's version of Playboy, which is pornography. And I am just going to be a nerd real quick.
Before you get into that, I just watched a whole Instagram skit the other day about book talk and it being gooning for women.
Oh, yeah.
And the poll on the post just said who goons harder, men or women. And the whole thing became an argument that just broke out about whether literal sex scenes is different than visual sex scenes, and getting into the debate about men being more visually focused and women being more mentally focused.
Yeah, and these sex articles that are featured in magazines like Cosmo are basically glorified erotica. So there's almost no difference, and that's a huge influence as well. But I want to give a shout out to Carrie Gress because she wrote this book, The Anti-Mary Exposed. It's more from a Catholic perspective, but one interesting part of it that I recalled when I read Gracie Abrams' comment is her going into the history of Cosmo and its inspiration from Playboy. So the founder's name is Helen Gurley Brown. She was the author of Sex and the Single Girl, and she was fascinated by the success of Playboy and decided to make her own version of it. She got pointers from Hugh Hefner and followed the Playboy model as closely as she could, right down to using the same writing agents and layout model. It quickly became the hottest women's magazine in the nation. Revenues for the magazine went up from $600,000 in 1964 to $47.7 million in 1985. While others were struggling to get advertisers, Cosmo had no problem getting backers. Other magazines quickly followed the Cosmo model to the point where there was very little difference between self, glamour, and Cosmo content. Cosmo was all about selling a lifestyle. Motherhood was out and sex was in. Helen Gurley Brown's motto was, "Hard work and sex will set you free as long as you don't have children." Even the throw pillow on a couch in the magazine's lobby said, "Good girls go to heaven, bad girls go everywhere." As part of this lifestyle, a Cosmo girl could be anything she wanted except a virgin or a mother. She could be a lesbian, a brothel owner, or a stripper, but she could not remain a virgin or become a mother. Cosmo girls run roughshod over their fertility, although I'm sure this was never part of their advertising slogan. Tough as a whore was never meant to be a compliment, and yet feminists turned it into just that. Sue Ellen Browder started on staff and then freelanced for Cosmo for 2 decades and was a dutiful writer of fiction for the magazine. Most readers didn't realize that she was making these stories up. Many of the alleged real people we wrote about in Cosmo were entirely fictitious. The Cosmo girl was not a real person, but a persona, a mask the single girl, lonely and alone in the world, could put on to turn herself into the object of a man's sexual fantasies.
Does that mean that Penthouse Forum was made up too?
Probably.
Darn.
The typical Cosmo girl had a glamour job, traveled a lot, and spent her hard-earned cash on pricey commodities to support her self-centered lifestyle.
Sex in the City.
Sue Ellen Browder, this writer, said, "Make no mistake, we're not talking here about what's popularly called spin. This was hardcore sex revolution propaganda masquerading as fluff." She eventually converted to Catholicism, but that was after the damage was done as a Cosmo writer. She makes it clear that they weren't doing women or men any favors despite appearances. We visibly pretended to set women sexually free from their biology via the pill and abortion, and we were invisibly catering to and even helping to create millions of sexually troubled, insecure, confused women who were likely to attract equally confused, insecure men. Girly Brown's influence didn't end with the magazine. She invited editors from 13 different magazines in 1986 to a meeting. She spoke at the meeting, and the editors agreed to run pro-abortion articles in all of their March 1987 issues. Among the articles that appeared in Cosmo that month were Abortion, Your Right Under Attack, Choice, Separating Myth from Fact, My Illegal Abortion, and an article on why 8 famous women were pro-choice. These women colluded in promoting pro-choice articles to soften American women to abortion. So this was clearly all fictitious. And simultaneously, we see Gracie Abrams, who is completely ignorant to that fact, saying porn is fake, but Cosmo is real.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was kind of embarrassing. It gave me secondhand embarrassment to read such an ignorant take from her.
I mean, to be honest, what's sad is that whoever's interviewing her probably doesn't understand the history of the magazine they're working for.
Exactly,
so it
right?
doesn't really matter.
Right.
It puts into great context just how much concerted effort there was towards these very specific aspects of the sexual revolution and, the women's freedom.
Yes.
And how they've been pushed, how it's been pushed forward in society. So when people try to ask you, and one of the things that I always struggle with is when they try to ask you, like, well, what's the difference between second wave feminism and third wave feminism, and what do you mean by, when people critique feminism? Well, what don't you want equal rights? You have to be able to point out the concerted effort beyond just the idea of feminism, of all of the ways in which traditionalism has been attacked through the American media.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it's clear that this feminist brainworm has completely infected Gracie Abrams to the core based on other quotes that were pulled from this interview.
But it's also, this is like, it's like pay to play. Like, they have to think that way in that instance. It's like when we hear about Lily Rose Depp, it's like everything she says, like she just came off a factory line of Hollywood liberalism. How
is anyone going to take Gracie Abrams seriously as a Nepo baby unless she makes her entire personality about being a feminist? Mm-hmm. So, in case you haven't seen photos of Gracie Abrams, she is absolutely ripped. She is super toned, has visible abs. Everyone can see she is super muscular and looks like someone that works out. So in this interview, they asked her what she thought about people talking about her body and asking her about her workout routine, and said, "It's gotten out of hand. There's no end to the discourse on women's bodies. Like, shut up. It's not complicated. It's not your body. I don't have a routine. I swear on my life."
Meanwhile, Alan Richardson is like, "Yes, I will do an interview about how ripped I am."
And in this entire photo shoot that she did for the Cosmo issue, she's literally wearing no clothes, groping herself, pulling up her skirt, showing her body to the world, and is offended that people are taking notice of it and actually complimenting her.
I mean, this has been the discourse around women for, I don't mean to be rude, ladies, but this has happened for as long as a woman wearing a push-up bra says, "Stop looking at my chest."
Yeah.
Like that dichotomy, that lack of through line has gone on for as long as these things have
Nothing
happened.
new here.
Nothing new here.
$20 from Dr. Larcena. Mary, love the energy on Dogman and willingness to say the truth, even if mean. From a policy standpoint, Phil is right. Should be careful about Gov inserting. Remember unintended consequences, mission creep, and overreach. I'm not all too concerned about that.
At first, I thought he was talking about
honest.
the Dogman movie that just came out.
No, but that's literally about like that YouTuber, basically.
Is it? I thought Dogman was a famous kids series.
Oh, I thought you meant the horror movie.
No.
Yeah, there was this horror movie about this guy who's in a realistic dog costume and he's holding someone hostage to live out his fantasy.
In the chat, somebody says, "Eyes up here." Yes, eyes up here. Don't look there.
Yeah. She also praised Taylor Swift effusively in this interview, saying that no man has come close to defining pop culture quite like Taylor Swift. She said Taylor is an athlete, a brilliant business person, and a genius writer. She's a grounded human being who makes time for everyone in her life. It's been cool to be in the orbit of a person like her. There's nothing that comes close to what she has done. People will still gaslight her and her capabilities and all this shit, but please point me to one man who has come close to defining pop culture in this way. There is nothing, but people are not ready for that conversation.
Michael Jackson.
Literally, you could name any of her male predecessors.
Elvis.
And
The Beatles.
it's just it's a statement so asinine that it hardly even calls
Justin
for a
Bieber.
rebuttal. But she's saying it because she has the feminist brainworm.
Reminds me of when Jennifer Lawrence is like, they'd never put a woman in an action movie lead role before me.
Yeah. It's insane. So yeah, I hope that Gracie Abrams one day wakes up to the error of her ways, but it's unlikely.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.